Good evening and welcome to Prime Time Lawmakers, GPB's nightly coverage of the Georgia General Assembly for Friday, February 3rd, 2012, the 14th legislative day of the 2012 session. I'm Scott Slade, and coming up on tonight's program, the House approves $300 million to build hot lanes on I-75 as it passes the FY 2012 amended budget. Controversy over a new redistricting bill. The changes won't go into effect until 2014. Georgia's district maps were redrawn over the summer in a special session. We continue our leadership interview series tonight. House Majority Leader Larry O'Neill says not to expect a big fight over the FY 2013 budget. And it's the end of the legislative week. The General Assembly was in all 5 days. We welcome Buddy Darden and Bill Crane, two legislative experts, to put everything into perspective, everything from finding all that fuel tax money to ethics reform. All that and more is coming up tonight in Prime Time Lawmakers. But first, we go live to the Capitol, where the House passed the mid-year budget today. Here's Sandra Parrish.
Thanks, Scott. The supplemental budget passed today is just a slight increase over what lawmakers passed last year. It includes additions to education, corrections, and the Department of Transportation.
In the $18.5 billion amended budget, there's a net increase of about $255 million, or about 1.39% in total funds.
The 2012 mid-year budget includes $165 million in adjustments for K-12 education, nearly $86 million for student growth, and nearly $8 million for the state's special charter schools. England says the Department of Agriculture will get $75,000 to help fund two state liaisons to help Georgia farmers find laborers.
Ag as a whole took quite a hit in having crops left in the fields. A lot of that had nothing to do with the illegals being here to help pick and process those crops, but it was, I guess, the fear factor and farmers not understanding how to go through the H-1B and H-2A process to bring in legal labor. This is a temporary thing that's probably going to be only a 1.5 or 2 year program at this point, and we'll take and reassess it as we go forward.
Also included in the budget is $713 million in unused gas tax money for transportation projects. The House first had to pass a bill to allow money from the state's motor fuel tax to roll over from one fiscal year to another.
The Department of Audits has come in and they've realized that because we went to programmatic accounting, that there was an issue as far as being able to spend prior year motor fuel dollars the next fiscal year.
Of that money, $300 million will go to help pay for the I-75-575 reversible toll lanes project in Cobb and Cherokee counties. The money was needed after the governor halted the public-private partnership that was to fund it.
That's a project that I think is very, very important. It has a lot of regional significance. That corridor, as everyone knows, has a lot of need for congestion mitigation, and so I think, and we were on a path that we kind of got thrown off of some weeks ago, and I think this will put us back on the path to making a much needed improvement in that corridor.
The bill passed unanimously and now goes to the Senate. And Scott will have more from all today's happenings coming up in just a few minutes. All
right, thank you very much, Anna. I'm looking forward to hearing what happened introducing ethics reform today. It's week 5 of the legislative session, and the pace is starting to pick up. Kiosha Howard has the highlights with our week in review.
This week on Prime Time Lawmakers. On Monday, the 10th legislative day, the Senate passed the Sunset Law. Supporters say that measure would make state government more efficient, while opponents say the bill violates the separation of powers.
The intent is to evaluate the efficiency of state government and the productivity of each agency, and it's meant to make sure that we're utilizing our state resources and taxpayer money in the most efficient way possible.
I think you have a separation of powers issue, which I don't know that you can overcome. I don't think you can justify, or that the executive branch, I don't think you can take away his responsibility by passing a joint resolution of the General Assembly.
That bill moves to the House. On Tuesday, the House Higher Education Committee held a hearing on a bill by Representative Tom Rice to bar undocumented students from attending the state's public colleges and universities.
Students who are here without legal documentation should find opportunities elsewhere to get their education.
What we have found thus far is that of the 318,000 students enrolled in the system last fall, less than 0.1% are undocumented. All of those pay the out-of-state tuition rate, which at slightly more than 3 times the in-state tuition more than covers the cost of their education.
No vote was taken. Committee Chair Representative Carl Rogers thinks the legislature needs to wait on any such bill to see how the new system by the Board of Regents is working. On Wednesday, a House Education Subcommittee heard testimony on the need to make Georgia's current hazing law that was passed in 1986 tougher. Representative Joe Wilkinson, sponsor of this current bill, explains.
We started hearing about hazing in sports teams, and interestingly, minor sports and women's sports. And that's when we decided, perhaps this is the time to come forward with really tough legislation, to add on to the excellent legislation that was passed 25 years ago.
That legislation would prohibit anyone convicted of hazing from attending public school or college in Georgia. Also on Wednesday, the House gives unanimous passage to a bill to allow students to have their smartphones or other electronic devices in class for learning.
Right now, it is against the law in the classroom. I didn't bring my cell phone. Oh, yeah, I did. If you were to use your smartphone, if the teacher had a lesson and said, hey, go to this website and y'all look at it and we're going to have a lesson, that's against the law in the state of Georgia today. But we want to go ahead and get that out of the code and say, you know what, we're going to let the local principal and the local superintendent make policy as far as how they want to kids use the technology in the classroom.
The same bill also establishes an online state reporting site for homeschoolers. That measure goes to the Senate. On Thursday, the House Education Committee gave a do-pass recommendation to legislation that would create a constitutional amendment that allows the state to create charter schools. Last year, the Supreme Court found this practice unconstitutional.
I am simply taking us back to where I believe prior to that decision, every one of us would have thought the Constitution would be interpreted.
Also on Thursday, small businesses were on hand to tell legislators their concerns.
We don't need any more regulations. We don't need any more ordinances.
That hearing is part of the Red Tape Watch instituted by House Speaker David Ralston's Small Business Committee. And those are the highlights for this week under the Gold Dome.
All right, thanks very much, Kiyosha. We go back live to the state capitol now, again, where Sandra Parrish is standing by, and the House took up some old business to avoid a new controversy.
That's right, Scott. The House passed a redistricting bill today to make some adjustments to the House map passed during this special session this summer.
Their concern was that the plan that we adopted had 7 House members that would be representing Hall County. And their proposal that is here today, HB 829, reduces that number of state representatives from 7 down to 4 members for Hall County, and 3 of those are wholly within Hall County, and then 1 comes in from another district.
While the bill included changes to a few other districts as well, Representative Mark Hatfields was not among them, but he took the opportunity to speak out against the maps and how his district was redrawn during the special session.
What it did was it split my county, my home county, Ware County, into 3 separate pieces.
With ethics?
The part that was drawn into a district with a little bit of Charlton County, and then the massive part of Camden County, over 42,000 people in Camden, 10,000 in Ware. The way that these maps were drawn makes clear what's going on here. This isn't about being fair and transparent and doing what's right for the people. This is political payback, pure and simple. I had one friend here in the House who came to me, someone that I trust and has a great deal of integrity. Of course, I'm not going to name this person, but he said to me, he said, Mark, he said, they murdered you with those maps. They murdered you. And he was right. But more importantly, they murdered my constituents. They murdered the good folks down in southeast Georgia.
I have not heard anything more inaccurate said in the well of that House since I've been Speaker than what was said today, and that's the only thing I have to say.
Democratic Representative Joe Hextall jokingly said to Hatfield during that exchange, "Welcome to my party." That bill passed almost exclusively along party lines and now goes to the Senate. And we'll have more coming up, Scott, on an ethics reform bill that the House leadership, Speaker David Ralston, dropped today.
Looking forward to hearing that, Sandra. Thanks. Even though the 2012 amended budget passed the House today, there's much more work to be done. In fact, There's an entirely different budget to be worked on, the one for fiscal year 2013 that begins July 1st. I spoke with House Majority Leader Larry O'Neill, and he told me not to expect a big fight over the big budget.
Yeah, I wish there was something to fight over, frankly. I really do, but the short answer is I don't see any major fights in it at all. Again, it's very austere. It is, at least this year, only a 2% across the board budget cut. But, you know, that's accumulation over about the last 4 years of 27%. So we've balanced our budget. We haven't added to our debt. We've reduced our debt, and we've added to our rainy day fund. Which under these circumstances has been frankly incredible. And very, I think, responsible budget. And we still have that wonderful AAA bond rating. I want to get us out of here as quick as we can, get the one thing we're absolutely constitutionally mandated to do, which is get a balanced budget for Georgia passed, and get us out of the way and let people get back to work in Georgia. That's my number one priority, my number two, and my number three.
So how do you see the charter school constitutional amendment resolution moving forward?
The resolution that you're talking about basically responds to a recent court decision, which a lot of folks in education thinks really went beyond charter schools. And the constitutional amendment will deal with that. And basically it's a balance of power over the curriculum at the local level as opposed to the state level, as opposed to the federal level.
One of the biggest arguments is about local control, especially when you're talking about spending local tax dollars to run a school that is controlled by the state.
I hear that, and there's some validity, at least indirectly, to that argument as it relates to the funding, but what we seem to have lost complete sight of is a charter school is a public school too. And there is, at the end of the day, the judgment should be how well the students are doing.
And how do you see tax reform moving forward? What can we afford to do, particularly on the energy sales tax issue?
We're the only state in the Southeast that imposes sales tax on energy used in manufacturing, which puts Georgia at a very non-competitive stance with other states to attract manufacturing jobs and industry. Obviously, though, we still have to balance our budget, and that's a significant part of a lot of people's budgets. There's a local impact that goes with that policy as well. And if we were to exempt local, for instance, education taxes, ESPLOS, that people in counties have already voted to impose upon themselves and budgeted accordingly, it would probably be a very onerous dictate from the state, down to the local government. So we have to take into account both the static and the dynamic effect of that over time. But what I see is a very strategic, targeted reform taking place in that regard as well, all of which will be targeted on job creation, private enterprise job creation going forward, the things that we're going to get the most bang for our buck from.
Well, it's going to be expensive.
It will be less expensive to the budget if there's a phase-in, and that's what's being under consideration now.
You have a very broad background as a tax attorney, a practicing tax attorney. How do you see the whole idea of enhancing the tax collections of the state of Georgia moving forward, the state collecting what it's actually owed?
We've had tremendous tax reform in the sense of how well our revenue department is now able to deal with collection issues in an equitable and fair way across the board to everybody, and there are more checks and balances. And I'm proud to tell you it's taken over 10 years, but we have finally now installed, I think, all but one tax platform in our integrated tax system. And we're seeing collections way out ahead of other growth numbers, which indicate to me the only place that more money could be coming in, if it's not in the economic growth numbers that the forecasters have, is that we're doing a better job collecting delinquent taxes.
House Majority Leader Larry O'Neill, thank you very much for joining us.
You too. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
We'll go back live to the state capitol now. I was surprised that ethics reform took at least a small step forward today. Sandra Parrish joins us live again on that.
That's right, Scott. Republican leaders in the House introduced an ethics reform bill today. It would restore power to the State Ethics Commission when it comes to interpreting and applying the rules and laws governing lobbying and ethics investigations.
Well, we have been looking for quite some time at restoring the independence of the commission back to the level it was sometime prior to my being elected speaker. I thought that was something that we needed to do, and we're going to ask the Rules Committee and the House to give that favorable consideration.
Meantime, Senator Josh McCoon plans to introduce ethics legislation in the Senate next week that includes caps on gifts from lobbyists. It's similar to a bill already introduced in the House.
We're looking at a $100 limit on gifts from lobbyists to legislators, a slightly different limit for travel that's connected to official business of the General Assembly, but for the overwhelming majority of items that we've been discussing these last several days, the $100 limit is what will be applicable. The people need to feel like that they can be heard here at the General Assembly. And I know what I've heard from my constituents back home is there's a concern that there's a disconnect, that people get up here and that they're more influenced by the lobbyists wandering the halls than they are a constituent back home.
Now, unlike the House bill, McCoon tells me he has several Republicans in the Senate who have signed on to his measure. Now, Scott, it's worth mentioning that we learned late this afternoon that a state administrative law judge has rejected challenges seeking to keep President Obama's name off Georgia's presidential primary ballot, claiming that he's not a natural-born citizen. The ruling will be forwarded to Secretary of State Brian Kemp, who will make that final determination.
And he's got a deadline. I mean, that's primary's coming up on March 6th, so he's got to make a decision fairly quickly, doesn't he?
He does, just a few weeks away.
All right, thanks very much, Sandra. This afternoon, the House Judiciary Non-Civil Subcommittee submitted due pass recommendation for a bill that may bring tougher penalties for Georgia DUI offenders. The bill mandates a longer period of court-ordered ignition interlock devices for second-time offenders, which prevent the driver from operating the car while intoxicated. In addition, the bill encourages parental participation in alcohol awareness programs for high schoolers. The bill, supported in part by Mothers Against Drunk Driving, will go into effect in January of 2013. The legislation will now move to the full House Judiciary Non-Civil Committee for review. The deadline to register to vote in the March 6th presidential primary is the end of the day, Monday, February 6th. Opportunities to vote early are already available. Absentee voting by mail began in January, and in-person early voting begins February 13th. Early voting varies by county, but state law requires that early voting polling sites be open at least a Saturday, February 25th. Early voting sites may be different than regular polling places. If you have access to the web, you can find yours on the Secretary of State's My Voter page site at sos.ga.gov/MVP. You can also register to vote or request an absentee ballot through that site. If you're mailing in an absentee ballot, remember it must be postmarked on or before March 6th. We'll take a short break in Prime Time Lawmakers, but don't go anywhere. It's the end of the legislative week. We'll be talking to Buddy Darden and Bill Crane in just a moment. Analysis and everything from finding hundreds of millions of dollars in fuel tax money, ethics reform, and much more. It's going to be a lively discussion, so don't go away. Welcome back to Primetime Lawmakers. Looking for a way to fulfill that New Year's resolution to exercise more? Georgia State Park System is teaming up with the Georgia Association of Physicians Assistants to make healthy living a bit more fun. With a new RX for Fitness program, physician assistants can prescribe healthy hikes in the great outdoors, and patients can turn in their prescriptions for free park passes. This initiative is part of the State Park System's new Tons of Fun Fitness Challenge, which encourages citizens to use outdoor recreation as part of their regular exercise. By trading their prescription for a free pass, patients will not need to pay the $5 parking fee on their first visit. To learn more about the program, visit tonsoffun.org. The website also offers free advice from a personal trainer and nutritionist, recipes, a health journal, and more. To explore all the Georgia state parks and historic sites, visit georgiastateparks.org. It's the end of another week under the Gold Dome, and 14 days of the annual 40-day General Assembly session have come to a close. A few moments ago, you saw highlights of this week under the Gold Dome: charter schools, anti-hazing, undocumented students, sunset provisions, government efficiency. Legislation is moving forward. Joining me now to help put some of this in perspective is Buddy Darden, a former state legislator and congressman who is senior counsel to McKenna, Long, and Aldridge, and Bill Crane, political analyst with CSI Crane. It's great to have you both back on Primetime Lawmakers. Here we are
I'm
again.
getting ready to go have a a hike with Paula Dean, I think, in the free parking.
I don't think Paula Dean or Rachel Way is going to be waiting on you back at your car, but that's not a bad idea. I'm a great fan of Georgia Parks. I am friends of Georgia Parks. Let's talk about
Great to be back.
ethics reform. I mean, this comes up over and over again in front of the General Assembly. What do you think? Do we need a cap on what lobbyists give lawmakers?
I want to point out, I saw the other day where Representative Tommy Smith from down in Alma, Georgia, is pushing this, and he has pretty much got the leadership now to do their own bill. But what I want to tell you is that in 1981, when I came to the House of Representatives, he was already there, and he's still there. He's a little heavier now, his hair's turned white, but people have been underestimating him for the last 30 years, and I think it'd be a mistake not to miss this opportunity to at least do something in the area of ethics reform. And I think the House leadership and the Senate leadership ignores the issue at their peril.
Bill?
It's an election year, so it's hard with all of the storm around conflict of interest and Common Cause making all the noise they do to not do anything, to Buddy's point. You cannot legislate ethics any more than you can legislate morality. So you can put a gift cap on, but if somebody wants to get at a lawmaker, there's going to be a way around it. So I agree, they have to do something. I'm not sure that a $100 gift cap does much.
But when you've got Common Cause on one side and the Tea
You
Party
wanna
on
be-
the other
you wanna
side,
be with the angels, and
you
so
want
it's
to
an
be
election
somewhere
year.
in the middle.
Right.
Well, at least there's a metric to measure it by.
Yes,
you know,
and I
$100,
also think
$1,000, whatever, right?
I think more of the meat was in what the speaker was talking about in terms of enforcement and interpretation power for the staff of the Georgia Government Transparency and Campaign Finance Commission, formerly the Ethics
If
Commission.
nothing else, let them change it back to the
You
Ethics
can't
Commission.
because they're trying to make it more transparent. You cannot legislate ethics any more than you can legislate morality.
All right. Well, at least they're talking about it.
Yes.
At least they're talking about it. On to a different issue here, the budget. You know, it looks like the supplemental budget is done, and it looks like they found hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of unused fuel tax money in a drawer. Where did they find
Marcus
that money?
Collins, I think, might have. No, I'm just kidding.
His ghost perhaps appeared. Oh, boy. George Bush got fuzzy mouth, I guess.
Oh, gee whiz.
But somehow they found the money. I can't understand, frankly, how you can all of a sudden have $700 million you didn't know you had.
I know Sonny Perdue would have liked to have found some of that money, but I do think part of it too is that the economy is starting to thaw, and purchases. I mean, if you get on any highway around Atlanta, the traffic is picking back up.
Sure.
Whether it's happening in time enough for the presidential election, I don't know.
And you saw where Governor Deal, of course, now says that we're going to do this as a state project and not as a private project. And I think he's committed to doing something about the I-75, 575 corridor, because it's impossible to get up through there this time of the day.
Is that the way, though? Reversible toll lanes?
As we've talked about ethics and doing something, they have to do something for all of those folks. And if they want the T-Splost to have a chance, they have to announce something soon for both the I-75, 575 corridor and then the 85 corridor, 985 corridor that's still howling over those HOT lanes.
We all know the T-Splost has got to sell itself, and they've got to have something tangible to say we're doing. And so far, most people I've talked to aren't very enthusiastic about it yet.
And there's 11 other transportation districts other than Metro Atlanta that have to vote on this.
It actually, I think, has more chance of passing out state right now than it does in the metro area where the traffic congestion is greatest because people are disenchanted and in disbelief that the money's going to go where it's needed.
Well, there's going to be a very reasoned pitch for T-Splost, and I guess the Tea Party will have a lot to say about not voting in favor of it as well. We'll wait and see about that. As far as the supplemental budget is concerned, slight increase over what lawmakers passed last year, additions to education, corrections to the Department of Transportation, nothing really extraordinary.
Nothing really. I'm glad to hear you use the term supplemental budget because they've been trying to get rid of that name down there for the last 10 years, but they try to call it the amended budget, but that just doesn't fly because this is always a way you straighten out the problems from the year before. You've got a little extra money and you try to look after a few projects that you weren't able to get to the last year, and I think this is a legitimate use of the budget process.
Education was a winner, but I was surprised to see correction spending still going up in light of all that they're doing with the sentencing reform and trying to divert a number of hard beds into softer beds and diversion centers. So that they're not.
Except you don't have any choice. Most
Right.
of this is court mandated,
Right,
as you know, and you'll end up in court spending a whole lot more money if you don't do certain basic minimum requirements. When the state takes custody of a person's body, then they're responsible for it from health care right on down.
Tax reform, and the linchpin of all that's going to be the one thing they're really looking at under the microscope is this idea of exempting the sales tax in manufacturing on energy. And we heard from the majority leader a little earlier, And I said, well, how are you going to
They're
bite
going to
that off?
phase it in, they
Well,
say
a little
now,
at a
yeah.
time. And his whole point was you got to show business that we're serious about this.
Right.
Is that the way to go about it? Is it a practical way to do
I
it?
saw the lieutenant governor last week, and he was speaking to a group of reporters, and he said because it is $120 million, rather than try to bite it off in 1 year, that they were going to do a 3 to 5 year phase-in. But at that point, the leadership of the two chambers hadn't agreed. So I don't know if that's changed, if they've given a time schedule or they've announced anything publicly this week.
You've got to come up with that extra $300 million or so from somewhere, and you just can't say we're going to do that. And the great thing about the state budget, you've got to balance the state budget every year, and you just can't say, unlike the federal government, we're going to spend $300 million or forego $300 million in revenue and not account for it somewhere else.
Let's at least touch on presidential politics. 4 weeks from Tuesday is Super Tuesday. Mitt Romney will be in Georgia next week for an event. I don't have Newt Gingrich's schedule. I'm assuming the others will be here. Is this where Mitt Romney comes in to kill off the Gingrich campaign?
I would think if I was Mitt Romney, this is the last state that Newt Gingrich can really pick up some significant delegates, and it anchors geographically the entire Super Tuesday region. Will make Newt Gingrich spend a lot of money on a state that he should do well in and try to push his numbers down as much as he can and end it essentially Wednesday or Thursday that week after Super Tuesday.
You're right. If he doesn't do well here, then I think that's the end of the Gingrich campaign. He may not know it, but it's the end of the Gingrich campaign. And by the way, I see where Obama's going to be back on the ballot.
Well, yes. I was wondering if you bring that up. The state administrative judge says it's now up to the Secretary of State.
The judge who made the initial ruling that he had to come down here is pretty highly regarded, but I think he kind of got off track a little bit. And it would have been pretty embarrassing if we had temporarily put Obama off the ballot down here. I don't think we need that.
Even though he has no opposition.
Yeah.
Let's see, one more thing here before we go. Let's talk about charter schools. I wanted to get to that. The Charter Schools Amendment, do you see that moving forward here with this change that at least modifies how local money is used in a state charter school?
On the House side, it was fast-tracked to come up for a vote, and they think they've got almost the two-thirds vote because there are several Democrats who've announced they're going to support it. One of the things that was in contention this week and got killed was House Bill 797, which used the word flourished, that if a local school system wasn't flourishing, that the state basically could reach in and take that money and give it to a charter school. That was not only hard to define, but offensive to some, and that got killed, and Brooks Coleman committed last night on the show. That's done, and we can go on moving on things like changing the ballot language and trying to pen with the enabling legislation a bill together that people can support.
Yep. That so-called amendment was just window dressing. I don't think it changes anything. It may give some people justification to vote for it who maybe weren't going to do it, but this is going to be a hard call for some legislators to make this. I think it'll move through the House, but I think there might be some serious problems in the Senate where it's passed. But it does, in fact, take away local control and gives it to the state. And if the state and the people, the voters, want to make this change in policy, they're absolutely entitled to it.
We'll leave it there. Thanks very much for you both being. Let's get you back next week. Great to see you again. Coming up Monday in Prime Time Lawmakers, more in a series of education interviews. Georgia's education problems are complicated. There probably isn't an easy answer. We're going to do our part getting into the nitty-gritty of race to the top teacher evaluations, plus all the breaking news from the Capitol and insight analysis from the best political journalists in the state. Monday in Prime Time Lawmakers. Now, if you miss any part of this broadcast, you can see it again at 5:30 on Monday morning. Next, it's Rick Steves Europe on GPB. Rick travels to Norway's west and visits fjords, mountains, and Bergen. Thanks for joining us tonight.
This is a GPB original production.